give you basically in 3 hours as much stuff as I can that I know and I work with when I work with depression and depressives. And boy, working with depressives can be quite depressing if you don't get it right. And I'm going to give you basically some of the attitudes that I have, some of the ways I work, some of the techniques and tricks that I use, and also some of the models that I work with in working with depression, which is where I'm going to begin with my very first model. If, by the way, as we go through, anyone has any questions, just shout them out. Now, here was the thing that really got my interest a number of years ago, which was these things, these little pills that they give people, these things that come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, different modes of action, affecting the, basically, neurotransmitters in the brain. How do they know they work? Because at some point, they've got to come from the lab, where people have designed them, basically into the human population. But before they get to the human population, they have to do something. Now, if anyone's squeamish or has any particular things for animals, I apologize for what I'm about to tell you. I was shouted at once in a workshop when I taught this model, because apparently I was too happy as I presented it. Seriously, yeah. Okay, this is what I discovered. I wrote off to the drug companies in the way that I like to do. And I said, okay, what do you do? How do you know that how do you test your drugs? How do you test your antidepressant drugs? What is the basis of the model? This is what they sent me back. You have two metal cages, okay? Very simple metal cages that are connected on a circuit to a power source. There is a switch in the circuit, one complete circuit. Now, basically, all you need is two metal cages, one complete circuit, a power source, two rats, and one lab technician with a clicker. Because what you're going to do is place a rat in each of the metal cages and start pressing this button periodically to send a shock through the cages. Two rats in identical cages receiving identical shocks because they're on the same circuit. What they'll do is they do this with enough rats to discover how many shocks does it take to depress the average rat. So once you do this with enough, say you do this with 10,000 rats, you can work out what the average number of shocks is it takes to depress the average rat. Then what they'll do is they'll get a fresh bunch of rats, medicate them, wait whatever time they need to wait for whatever aspects of the study they're doing, put the rats in the cages, start pressing the button again, and we see if it takes more shocks to depress the rat. If it takes more shocks to depress the rat, you've got a positive result. If it takes fewer shocks to depress the rat, you've got a bad result. So you don't send that drug to market for antidepressant.
How do you know if a rat is depressed?
It starts writing letters home to mum, can't go to work anymore, has to claim benefits, doesn't get out of bed in the morning, watches daytime TV. Yeah. And they start complaining about the childhood and things are unfair and all that kind of stuff. It's rat speak, you just need to know the language. Then, in round about the 50s and 60s, with behavioralism as a discipline in psychology, the behaviorists went, that's quite an interesting kind of study. We can introduce some variables here. Let's put a lever in these cages. But with one of these cages, that lever in cage A actually works. When the rat presses the lever, the electric current gets shut off for a period of time. Pretty cool. Oh, this lever here in cage B doesn't work. They're both on the same circuit. They both get identical number of shocks. Except rat A learns if he presses the lever, he can control the quality and the duration of the shocks, or at least the respite from the shocks. Rat B learns he presses the lever, nothing happens. What we tend to see is rat B gets profoundly depressed far quicker than rat A. He starts writing letters home to mum and gets all unhappy and goes into counselling groups and all the rest of it. Then they did something, and this is the bit that is of interest. This rat here has learned if he presses the lever, nothing happens. This rat has learned if he presses the lever, something does happen, so he's got this element of control. They switched them over. They switched the rats to the opposite cages. Rat A is now in cage B, And he presses the lever and nothing happens. So he shouts over to his comrade over in the other cage, press the lever, press the lever. And the rat B who's over in cage A goes, no point, man. I've tried that before. Look, let me tell you why I'm not going to press that lever. Look, let me now give you the reasons why pressing that lever doesn't apply to me. Because, and the rat will go into the explanation as to why there is no value in taking an active role in doing anything, because it's pointless. Thus gave birth to the model of depression called learned helplessness. And this is one of the things that can frustrate any therapist or anyone working with people who are suffering profoundly from depression, is that that person will tend to be quite apathetic and be lacking the ability or the wherewithal to do anything, most of all the motivation. Now scroll forward to about 4.5, 5 years ago to my living room, where I'm sat talking to yet another depressive. I work from home, it's in my living room. And I'm sat talking to yet another depressive. And I start to notice a pattern. And some of you, this will be familiar already. And it's what I regard as the 3 pillars of depression. These are the 3 supporting structures of depression. Which is, in the first pillar, or the first column, we've got some emotions such as guilt, shame, remorse, and regret. In the middle one here, we'll put anxiety, stress, and panic. And in this one over here, we'll put anger and temper. Here's what I was noticing. The vast majority of people that I worked with who suffer from panic attacks and anxiety weren't actually getting any decent help from the therapy they'd received. The thing they tended to find the most effective was medication, but actually all the counseling, the CBT, the hypnotherapy, the NLP really wasn't helping them very much. But what I noticed about these guys is that a lot of them were constantly apologizing for stuff. They would apologize, they suffered lots of guilt, but they also had a tendency towards temper. This is the model I've got. Guilt, shame, regret, and remorse tend to drive and promote an arousal inside the nervous system which leads to anxiety, stress, and panic. When the person has that arousal inside the nervous system going on, that tends to promote a more likelihood towards anger and temper. Once the person has expressed this or gone through their anger or temper, classically as a result of that, they're back to guilt, shame, regret, and remorse. And this is the never-ending cycle. Once the first time I drew this up with a client and I showed it to her, she went, "You've just described my life." The more clients I show this to who suffer from any one of these disorders, but particularly anxiety-driven depression, say the same thing, that this tends to describe their life. So then I started looking further at this, because I was interested in these rat studies where the depressogenic model of how do you depress a rat. What I'm about to say to you is actually a proposal, and I suspect there are local cultural differences. Different parts of the country, different parts of the world, there will be variations on this. This bit isn't, though. Guilt, shame, regret, and remorse are about the past. People tend not to feel guilty about stuff that hasn't happened. It's always about they're guilty about stuff in the past that has happened. We tend not to regret things that haven't yet happened. Anxiety and panic and stress tend to be about the future. They're about things that haven't yet happened. And anger and temper are usually very much about the now, in the here and now. This is the bit where the cultural variations lie. Guilt is about rules. I feel guilty because I broke the rules. The rules, the generic shared rules. Shame. I'm ashamed of myself because I knew better. I broke my rules. Remorse. I feel bad for the consequences to you or to the other person for my breaking of the rules. And regret is, I feel bad about the consequences to myself for my breach of the rules. Anxiety, stress, and panic are a different kettle of fish. This is not about not knowing what the rules are. If I knew what the rules were, if I knew what I had to do here, if somebody explained what was going on, I wouldn't be so stressed. In fact, if I had a sense of certainty, if I had some idea about what I'm supposed to do here, then I wouldn't be having this panic attack right now. Someone tell me what's going on. Please, someone help me out here. This is about the person not having access to a stable set of rules that are reliable to tell them what's going on and how to act and behave. Anger and temper are about another person breaking the rules. You broke the rules, you broke my rules, more importantly, and that makes me angry. Or you broke the cultural rules that I hold to have value. This is the thing that I noticed. The people who suffer the panic attacks, who have this kind of constant apology, and they also have a bit of a temper, in order to allay their anxiety, stress, and panic, they will invent rules. That in order to generate certainty, they may start to generate rituals, they may start to generate rules about what people should do. That should word is a very, very common word with depressives. The way things should be. It shouldn't be like this, it should be like that. This is making cultural rules. And in this state, the person becomes the rule maker. As a result, not everyone else in that person's sphere of experiences shares those rules. So they're more likely to get broken, leading the person to anger and temper. They do their outburst bit, and then they're back again, and round it goes. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Any questions about that bit? Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah, very familiar for me. Can I just backtrack? Is this relating to my knowledge, there's different forms of depression. There's like chemical depression and there's traumatic depression. Is it all linked to depression? Is it?
Yeah. Let me give you basically the three major models of what depression will be, or what the causes are. I don't want to go too much into the causes. We could have whole conferences going on for weeks about the possible causes. But basically, you've got the biological models, okay, which is your chemical imbalance, your genetic problems, your disposition, all of that kind of stuff. Head injuries, acquired brain injury, that kind of stuff. You've got your social constructivist theory. And the social constructivist will even argue that maybe, I don't know if I spelled that one, social constructivist, that will suggest that possibly that depression is a role within society, and that people fit into that role because it's been engineered within a cultural group, not necessarily by choice or by design, but it's constructed socially. And then you've got your psychological explanations, which mostly revolve around learning theory.
Like social conditioning.
Right.
Yeah.
Most contemporary theories will actually say it's a portion of each of these. And then you'll find conferences where people will argue for a week as to which theory is the most valid. One of the things about depression, and this is what I noticed when I worked in casualty, we would have somebody who was brought into us in a state of severe distress and despair, having attempted suicide. Back in the days when I worked in casualty, we didn't recognize at that point, this was 93, 94, we weren't aware as professionals that people did deliberate self-harm that wasn't a suicide attempt. That we didn't know about that at that time. So people who had done cutting or ingestion of something, whatever else, but hadn't really, it was a half-hearted attempt, we interpreted that as suicidal ideation or suicidal gesturing. And I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. Oh, no, I remember. What we found, what I noticed, was that person would be brought into us in a state of severe distress. We would do the usual, do the first aid treatment, pump them out, whatever it was that was required. But when the psychs came down, the psychiatric professional, whether it be the psychiatric nurse, the social worker, or the psychiatrist, here is the question. Why did you do it? What's wrong? And basically, in a one-sentence, concise answer that can be recorded in the notes, that depressive person, or that person in a state of despair, now needs to succinctly generate a full-loaded meaning of their entire life in one sentence that satisfies the medical requirements. And what I used to watch was that the patient look at the psychiatric professional with disdain and go, you couldn't possibly understand. Because I can't tell you what's wrong. Because nothing is wrong and everything is wrong. Now, this is one of the difficulties. R.D. Laing said, we can never understand another person's experience. We can never know another person's experience. We can only ever know our experience of their experience. And this is one of the difficulties that a lot of people in this kind of psychological pain and despair will have, is to try and communicate succinctly across to another person in a way that you'd understand. Me, I don't even ask the question. As a healthcare professional who is paid by people to change people, there is no value in me asking what the matter is. Now, the person might say, I am depressed, I'm depressed. That is a very, very different statement to saying I feel depressed. And again, is a very, very different statement to saying I am a depressive. I am a depressive is an identity role the person has taken on. And it's probably quite an accurate one. I'm depressed is a complex equivalency. I is equal to depressed. Okay, complex equivalency. The classic questions the NLP practitioner will ask this client is, depressed about what? Why do you care? Is the most important question I would ask any therapist. If you're asking them what they're depressed about, what is your motivation there? Is this because you're now going to get down and dirty and into that person's life with them or for them? I'm depressed about what? My husband's behavior towards me. Suddenly, you've now got the wrong person in the room if you're doing any form of change work. Because if the husband's not in the room, how are you going to change his behavior towards that person? That's not a therapy issue. That's an issue you may want to get in your car, drive over that person's house and beat him up. But if you're not prepared to do that, we have to ask the question, why ask the question about what? So about what goes in a certain direction. Okay? It goes very much into content. And so I'm depressed about that event. But unless I'm going to get involved with that event, there's nothing I can do about it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if you have that role where you get involved. In which case, you might want to consider joining law enforcement. You might want to consider joining social services, that kind of stuff, where you can get involved with that. But as a therapist, there is no value in that question. You could ask that question, which I used to try, which is the how are you depressing yourself? Let's take the nominalization and return it back into a process. How are you depressing yourself? I used to ask that question. The client would look at me like I was really dumb and go, that's a really stupid question, I've got no idea what you're talking about. And right inside that head of that client, a realization would occur that their therapist, who they're paying for, has not got a clue what he's doing. How are you depressing yourself? Again, why do you care? Unless you want to build models of depression, which could be useful. If you're modeling, these are useful questions. But if you're changing people, these aren't useful questions. You could go why, which a lot of NLPers say, no, we don't ask the why question. Don't go into that because that takes you into beliefs and that could be problematic. Why are you depressed? I love that question. Why are you depressed? They tell me. And I go, does it surprise you then that you're depressed? And they go, no. I go, cool. What's the problem? Spin it round. So these are the kind of things that people say. But more often than not, do we actually care why they're depressed? Or do we care about the depression? If we're going to get the person changing, is there any value in even talking about their depression? Is there any value whatsoever? And it's an important consideration because too many therapists feel they have to get involved. And then the client goes into their depression, of course. Because to answer the questions, they have to associate into their states. And they start slowing down. And the tears start. The pain starts. Their despair will build up inside them. The tears and snot start to flow. And then the therapist looks at them and goes, oh, God, is this what it's like for them? But they weren't crying and snotting over the place when they first arrived. They only started crying and snotting when you started asking the questions. This is a really, really important consideration. It's a story I've often told, But I once opened the door to find a lady, my 10 o'clock appointment, standing on the doorstep already in tears. I opened the door to find this lady crying. So I just shut the door again. I have to say at that moment in time, I started thinking, what do I do next? I didn't have my next step. So I waited. The doorbell rang again, and I opened the door, and she's still standing on the doorstep crying. So I just shut the door again really quick. And, oh, shit. A few minutes pass. We go through this ritual again, about 3 more times. And finally I open the door. She's not crying anymore. I go, have you done? Have you finished? And she said, I think so. Well, I want you to know so. You're not coming in until you do. These are really important because the way these opening things are going to direct the way the session goes. And you don't really want their despair in charge of what you do. Because you're the therapist, you're supposed to be in charge of what's going on, not their despair. And then I used to see some other stuff going on, and this used to drive me nuts. I sat around watching lots of other therapists working with clients. And basically there's this thing about humans, and it's an NLP term I hear a lot, which is people calibrate to the strongest state. Okay? People calibrate to the strongest state. That used to puzzle me. I had no idea what that meant. Until I started paying attention. Who is the person in the room that leads the atmosphere or who leads the way people feel? The person with the strongest state. What I used to watch happen in therapy sessions was quite priceless, in that the therapist would be all caring and sharing and being very nice, would be asking the scripted questions most of the time. The scripted questions of the client would go into their despair and their hurt, would start breaking down. The therapist would ask the client questions, and they'd just burst out sobbing. And then the therapist would sit there and go, oh shit, feeling a bit of despair and a bit of sadness themselves. And oh shit, I don't know what to do. This person's going to cry for the rest of the day. And they would sit there and wait. Or possibly hand them a tissue or something like that's going to help. And they'd sit there like this going, oh, I'm crying, not sure what to do. And they'd often wait, and then they'd ask some inane question like, are you feeling better now? So what was that about? And then off they go again. And then the whole time this is going on, the client is apologizing to the therapist for their emotional pain. No client should have to apologize for their emotional pain. That's an obscenity. The fact is, that's why they're there, because things hurt. So here's what I saw happen. The therapist would get dragged down emotionally and dragged all the way down into the pits of hell of the client's despair. And then the therapist, will be struggling to get out of this pit, to try and basically rescue the session, because they have to do this really weird thing. They have to end the therapy session on a happy ending. Everything has the introduction, the story, and a happy ending. And it's like 5 minutes left of the session, and the client's still crying. There's no sign they're going to stop. There's another client coming in 6 minutes, and God, I can hear the car coming up the drive, and the therapist is now going, oh God, what am I going to do? They're going to kill themselves, aren't they? They're going to kill themselves. They're going to go out this door, and now I'm not going to, and now I can't even do any service for the next client because I'm going to be worried about what happens next. And so we have this, I'll give you a call later, or come and see me later, or we have this caring, sharing kind of thing going on where we feel we have to get involved in that client's life. That's madness. Like they've never cried before. They've never felt that pain before. It's one of those weird things. So here's what I tend to do. I write the client's name on the tissue before they arrive in one of these pens. If they're called Sally, I'll write Sally on the tissue. It takes a bit of practice because otherwise the tissues tear really easily. You've got to use the right kind of pen as well. These ones don't work so well unless you mash the end. No, seriously, because they're quite sharp, the points are sharp, it tears the tissue. But if you mash up the end and it makes it all soft, you can then write the person's name. Now here's what I'll do. The person may tip over the edge. They may hit threshold to tip over into tears. And I'll go, hold it right there. I've got it. Here's one. It's got your name on it. Okay, so the tissue with your name on it. Or I might go, stop. Before you cry, I need you to know I'm getting low on tissues. I'm going to the shop this afternoon. I've got 4 left. So you're going to have to ration yourself. These things work so well because I'm not going to allow their pain, their despair, their horror to affect my state. Because I know that the way I am is as powerful as what I do. Now, this takes me into the third model, which I'm just amazed people don't know about. I'm shocked, in fact, I have to say. It shocks me that so many people working in therapy do not know this stuff. It's called the Depressor Genesis model. I'll even write this down for you. Depressor Genesis. The creation of depression. This was first noticed in the 50s. R.D. Laing wrote about this quite a lot. The guy who actually named this, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Here is what they noticed. Depressed mothers tended to have depressed babies. And for a lot of mothers, having a baby can be quite a depressing experience, especially if it's an ugly baby. It can be quite depressing. You think, my God, I'm going to have to live with that for the next 16 years. But these things are quite stressful times. There's also the relationship issues. There's the suddenly your life is not the same anymore. There's all of the things that happen. It's really difficult for some people. Plus, there's all the biochemical problems that go on as well as a result of having had a baby. Depressor Genesis. Depressed mothers, this is the pattern they noticed. By depressed baby, the baby was apathetic and listless and didn't initiate any communication. The gooing, the cooing, the ga-ga-ga, the ha! The babies didn't initiate any of that behavior. Part 1 of Depressor Genesis. Mother interacts with child. Okay? Elicits a response from child. But part 2 is when the child initiates, mother doesn't respond. When the child initiates, no response. This is what the baby learns really quickly. Now, bearing in mind, it's like this kind of sponge of information. When mother gives me coo, baby goes coo back. When baby goes coo, nothing. Coo, 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 coo. Nothing happens. Child learns really quickly. There is no reward gained by initiating behaviors of communication. But mother doesn't know this because mother doesn't notice, or father, or whoever it is. Because mother interacts with child, and when the interaction is going on, of course the baby responds, because the baby learns to respond to mum. That's great. But the responses of mother towards child, no. This was the beginning of some of the psychological explanations that then fed into the neurobiological explanations. Because one of the suggestions was that the child raised in this kind of environment will have a developmental stuff going on as well, whereby they become non-responsive themselves. Or they don't expect other people to respond to them. Here is the basis of crushingly low self-esteem. He initiates stuff with me, and I feel I have to respond to him. But my self-worth is so low, I don't ever initiate anything because there's nothing I do that has any value. Because I measure the value by the way people responded to me. And no one ever responded to me before, so I don't see why he should. And when he does, he scares me. That's the basis of Depressor Genesis and how that ties into the experience of low self-esteem. Any questions about that bit? Is it true? Yeah. One of the things I found, one of the things I found with this, when I work with those, see, here's one of those classic things about some depressives. They will sit, their idea of interacting with people is to do this. That's it. They don't do anything. They may respond and they may nod along, but they won't actually offer anything up for themselves. This is when I run this pattern by them, they all go, "You've just explained my life." Because what I want people to be able to do, you see, this also ties in with our twin rat model, whereby the rat learns, don't bother doing anything because it holds no value. Now, how do we learn to measure the value of stuff? This is really one of those fundamental things of experience. How do we measure the value of stuff? And often it is by the reaction we get. We measure things by how we feel. If I feel really bad about something, that was a really bad thing. If I feel indifferent to it, it wasn't a bad thing. But also, part of that learning is by other people's response to us as well. With that in mind, this is why when those clients start breaking down and sobbing and they go into that pain and despair, my response set to them never matches and feeds back the same thing of the depressogenic model. Because what they've learned to do is that when they have stuff going on, no one else interacts with them. And here is what I have seen happen hundreds of times. The depressive client in a therapy change work session breaks down and cries, and the therapist sits there and doesn't speak. Brilliant. Thus, perpetrating the model. Here's one of the things I noticed about working with anorexics. Around the anorexic, because anorexia is a scary condition, because people die from it. The majority of them do. Irrespective of the help they get, the majority of anorexics will die. But in the early stages, all the focus now is around the pain and suffering of the anorexic. And there's all the joy and fun around this person's life evaporates. It disappears. Because now it's all the suffering that it entails in the family and the social group. And everything now becomes this whole sole focus of negativity upon this poor individual, thus exacerbating the problem. No one seems to have fun with them. And certainly with a lot of the depressives, no one seems to have fun with them either in terms of change work. Because there's always this thing in the back of the therapist's head. Oh my God, what happens if? Yeah, and what happens if a gorilla comes in the room with a machine gun? Yeah, there's always the what happens if. Always. Always. Now, there's other stuff. Again, some of you will have heard this one before, so please forgive me. People come out with stuff that I just find intriguing. And again, in the classic model of Depressor Genesis, the client will say certain things and the therapist doesn't hear it. And they don't respond to it. Like, I hate myself. Here is pretty much word for word a conversation I had a little while back with a very, very depressed lady. I said, what's the problem? And she said, I'm depressed. And I said, I get that. What's the problem? And she said these words, I hate myself. So I said, right, what do you want? I love that. My favorite question is, what do you want? So I said, what do you want? And she says, I want some self-esteem. And I say, do you feel like you're a bad person? And she, a little tear, goes, yes. And I said, I agree with you. I think you are a bad person. And I just pause for effect. Because now in her brain, I'm not going down that route of where the therapy session goes. And she says, but why? But why? And I said, I'll tell you why I think you're a bad person. You say, I hate myself. And what you want from me is self-esteem. This is not a self-esteem issue. This is a hate issue. And if you want me to raise your self-esteem, what you're asking me to do is to be able to carry on hating without consequence. That's why I think you're a bad person. And then I just pause. While her brain goes, you hear the things grinding around, going, oh shit. I go, yes, oh shit, indeed. Now, we're going to have to do something about the hate. Now, this is really important. This is fundamental stuff. And it's really, really straightforward. Because there's two parts of this equation. And these things fly by so quick. What I recommend anyone doing who's starting out in therapy change work, record your sessions so you can play them back afterwards. All the clues are there. The best ones to really study are those ones where at the end of the session, you were suicidal. Or homicidal, one of the two. Because you will hear that the quality of those interactions and how that client was inadvertently putting you in that state. There is the activity of hating, and there is the activity of being hated. Okay? The relationship between the two connected by mind. So it's the hating bit we need to do. Because what the person will do is go, I hate myself, I want some self-esteem, therefore leave that side of the equation alone. That's the one I'll go for. Because we've got to get the strategy. We've got to deal with the strategy by which the person does the problem, not the way they feel about the problem. This is how I picture what I regard as the great NLP therapeutic error. Not the NLP models, but people who are using the NLP models in therapeutic change work. And this is the picture of how I see it. Imagine there's an island out in the tropical place somewhere. It's a beautiful island. And there's people who live there happily for generations. But there's a great big volcano on this island. And one day, it's been in legends as well. They know it's happened before. The stories have been told about what happens when the volcano god gets angry. And they know the volcano god is angry because there's smoke coming up the thing and it's rumbling around and it's all big scary stuff. So what do these people do? They kill a few goats, strangle a few chickens and dance around whooping. Because if they can make themselves feel good, if they can supplicate themselves to the volcano god in a sufficient manner, the volcano god will change his mind. Me, I leg it. I wouldn't be sticking around. I'd be off. I would be on the first boat off there. But this is what, now let's go, there's the same island. But now we introduce the NLP therapist. Not the NLP, but the NLP therapist who's going to make the therapeutic error. And what we have on the island now is all these people going, my God, that's really scary. It's a big fucking volcano. It's going to erupt. And the NLP therapist goes, that's all right, guys. I know where to tap with the hammer. Take the representation you have in your head, make it smaller, further away, slide it out there, black and white, smaller into the distance. There you go. Doesn't feel so bad now, does it? The volcano is still going to erupt. Bottom line. So now, this is the thing that tends to happen. Often, the person who hates themselves probably has really good reason to do so. Otherwise, we need to check how they reason stuff. It's really simple. Often, they are quite unlikable and quite contemptible. And their assessment of themselves is absolutely accurate. But I know that hating things doesn't help them change. So what we've got to do to begin any process is start with the strategy bit first. And that's the fundamental part. How do they do the hate? Here was one I heard quite recently. And this had me almost rolling around on the floor laughing. The man arrives, he's really depressed. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, I'm depressed. And I said, what's really the problem? I love that line. When people give you a diagnosis, they go, what's really the problem? What's really the problem? And he said, I feel like I'm not going anywhere. So I said, when you're depressed, what happens? What do you do? He said, I sit and I mope. Mope means he just feels bad and sits down. So I said, you get depressed, you sit and you mope, and you feel like you're not going anywhere. And he said, yeah, that's about it. And I said, well, have you ever considered sitting and moping on buses? And he kind of looks at me. And I said, because at least then you'll be going somewhere. Now again, this is not in the script of how it works. This guy's been in that, he's been depressed for years. So this look says, I'm not happy with what you're saying here, Austin. So okay, so you don't like buses, I get that. Have you ever considered sitting and moping on trains? There's some really good deals these days on the internet. Now, he gets really, really kind of, I thought, wow, he's changed his state. He's gone from being depressed to being angry. And then I ask, okay, so you don't like trains, public transport's not for you, it's not for everybody. Planes, what about planes? Really cheap deals now. You can fly almost anywhere in the world to anywhere. Great, really cheap too. And this is what he does. He now gets really pissed off, he's really unhappy with me. And he said, I'm really not happy with you. And I said, I get that. And he said, that's it. I'm not standing for this, he says as he stands up. He is so out of touch with what he's doing in his strategies. Now, he says he's not going anywhere. That isn't a problem. That is not a problem. That is his strategy. His strategy is he sits still when he's depressed, and he doesn't go anywhere. It's not a figure of speech. He's describing exactly what he does. The client the same day, he was saying to me he could never find time. So just look down there for me. Is it down there? No?
No.
Time. That is exactly what I did. And he was like... Because not finding time isn't the problem. Not finding time is what he's trying to do to solve a problem. He's trying to find time. You don't find time. That's not how it works. Time doesn't work that way. And he can be trying to find it for the rest of his life, and he won't. He hasn't so far. He's not going to. So now here is one of... This is the fundamental basis. This is the fundamental basis of what I do with depression. I noticed that most depressives aren't moving. They're stuck. They don't have the motivation to move either. They feel they're stuck. They don't know where to go in life. They're lost. They feel lost. They're aimless, without aim. They don't know where they're going. In one of the psyche units I worked in, the depressive group there, one of the things I demanded of them on my first day was really simple. I said, guys, I've got to say I'm not overly impressed with your behaviors. I'm not. And in their classic way, they go, but we're so sorry, why? So guys, I'm not impressed with your behaviors because a lot of you have been here for many months, some of you have been here for years, some of you will be here for years, especially if I have my way. I don't want you lot contaminating the happies. Now, what I'm not impressed with your behaviors is my tax money is paying for you people to be here, and I've seen some of you smiling. I've seen some of you coming out of depression periodically and having kind of lighter moments. So that's not acceptable. If I'm going to be paying for you people to be depressed, I want you doing it properly. Now get to it. That was my opening line, by the way, before I'd even introduced who I was. That's my opening line. People will calibrate to the strongest state. Okay, they calibrate to the strongest state. So I'm going to enter with my state. Oh, and by the way, now every time one of these depressives, and some of them will be really good at it, goes into their depressed state, I can congratulate them. Because I've asked them to do it. I've just removed the spontaneity. It's a good opener. Here's what I said to these guys. What have you got to look forward to? What have you got to look forward to? And in that classic miserable, depressed kind of way, they went, nothing. Looking forward, by the way, is an expression that we have as humans because our eyes are at the front of our heads. We look forward to things. Okay? It's really obvious. We look forward to things. What have you guys got to look forward to? They said nothing. Well, I know that's not true. Well, when they were sat in the circle, of course, what they're looking forward to is the bloke sat opposite them. That's what they look forward to. So you're looking forward to the miserable git that sits opposite you. Now that's a priceless bit of reasoning for some people. Now in timeline, by the way, this is anyone who does timeline work, this is a routine I have used endlessly to great hilarity from with the most miserable people. Ask people if they've got a thing that's stuck in their head, a picture, a memory, an event, an experience that they can't shake, and elicit where it is, and invariably because it's a problem, it's in front of them. So I'll say, okay, so that's in front of you, so that's what you look forward to. They go, well, I wouldn't say I look forward to it. Well, it's in front of you, so you do look forward to it. Okay, let's get realistic here. It's grown-up time. It's not messing around time. Your eyes in front of the head, that representation's in front of you. This is what you look forward to. And they'll go, well, yeah, if you put it like that. I go, that's beautiful. That is such a nice thing. Everyone needs something to look forward to, and this is what you have to look forward to every day. Isn't that nice? People go, no, but that's not right. Well, it might not be right, but that's what you're doing. Now, suddenly, the whole reality structures of the interactions, they go, well, hang on. Yeah, maybe. People will move it really readily then. So what have you got to look forward to? They'll go nothing because we're depressed. Because we're depressed, we have nothing to look forward to. I have a little suspicion it's the other way around. If you remove people's ability to have something to look forward to, they'll get depressed. It's the other way around. And here is the weirdest, damnedest thing. And every other day with this particular group, they were sat round in a circle for an hour discussing how bad they felt. No one was giving them a future, but everyone was enabling them to dig a deeper hole inside their depression. Charles Faulkner has a thing where he teaches about elevation, different points of axis. Elevation is very much about mood. We feel down in the dumps, we feel very low, we feel high, we cheer up, we fall. We lift ourselves up. We lift our mood. Some people wait for a lift. That's a really weird one, actually. If you watch outside lifts, people will go up one floor. To go a little way up in the world, they're going to wait to be carried. Just a thought. Here's what I've got to do. I wanted to give people direction. I wanted to give people a destination, somewhere to go. More importantly, I wanted them to have meaning. Viktor Frankl's thing. In Man's Search for Meaning, or it was called Death Camp to something. Viktor Frankl's book, he's saying if you take away meaning from people, they often wither and die. Give people meaning, they can pretty much endure anything. So this is my way of giving people meaning. I want to find out, really, what's the point of them? And the way I find that out is I ask the question, I go, what's the point of you? And if they go, I haven't got one, I go, I thought so. But you know the greatest thing about this? I still get paid. So at least there's some point. This lot in this particular psychiatric unit goes, but the staff don't care about us. All they want to do is give us drugs. And I say, that's right. They're not here for your benefit. They're here because, like me, my family are proud of what I do. I've got status, I've got qualifications, I go on courses and conferences. I have a good social life. Hospitals are great places to work in. The only downside is we've got to meet people like yourselves. It makes it easier when we medicate you. And they're like, you're not like the others. Remember, people calibrate to the strongest state. Now, here's the thing I noticed. People have always had this thing, I'm not going anywhere. I don't know where I'm heading with this. I don't know where I'm moving to. I don't see the point. I don't know where I'm going. I feel lost. It's like I've taken the wrong turn somewhere. I'm leading up the garden path. I'm going down the wrong road on this one. It's all about journeys. It's all about journeys. And every journey has a number of components to it. One of which is the direction and distance. When you map direction and distance, what you end up with is a destination. You'll hear these expressions all the time. I've got a long way to go yet. I've come so far in life. I've not got very far in life. I've ground to a halt. I don't seem to be moving in the right direction. These are all expressions people will tell you. And they litter language. And what I noticed was they just fly by so fast, therapists don't hear them. But they're telling you the whole time the strategy. So we've got direction and distance, which gives us destination. And what we have is speed of transport. I'm racing ahead. I'm zooming ahead. I'm plodding through this one. I'm wading. It's like I'm wading through treacle. I'm moving really slow on this one. I'm trying to catch up with myself. So we've got speed of transport. And we also have the mode of transport. The mode of transport. I'm taking the right steps in the right direction. I'm coming on leaps and bounds. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'm taking the right step forward. Think about it, the right step forward is unlikely to be the left foot. Just a thought. I like to get these things literal. So we've got direction, distance, speed, and mode. If all four of those are met, we're likely to have movement. If you don't have all four of those covered, you're unlikely to have movement. And when I put this out with depressives, I go, okay, where are you heading? They go, I don't know. Well, how far have you got to go? They go, I don't know. How are you going to get there? I don't know. And how fast are you going to get there? I don't know. I haven't got any of them covered. Because they're stuck. It's a stuck state. Stuck means they're not moving. Cool, huh? It's like I've fallen down a pit of despair. I'm in the pits of hell. I'm down in the dumps. I'm swamped by these problems. It's like I'm up against a brick wall. I can't move forward any further. I've got as far as I can go. People come to a static halt. So what we tend to do as the NLP therapists, and I have to emphasize, this is people using the NLP tools in therapeutic change work as opposed to what they were designed for. Here's what they do. What stops you? What stops you? Well, I've just got this thing in the way and I can't get it out of my head. So what they teach the person to do is to get the thing out of the head, make it smaller, further away, black and white, in a frame, whatever. They've still got the same crappy strategy that enabled them to have the problem in the first place, but at least now they don't feel bad about it. What I'm tending to see emerging from the NLP community, of course, is what I regard as happy idiots. And I mean this not in a derogatory way, but they don't feel anything bothers them anymore, and they almost take on this kind of ego and arrogance about the way they do stuff. But they don't actually have many skills or resources in life. But they don't care because they have this indifference, because they can take everything, double dissociate it, move it further away, etc., etc. But they're not addressing the strategies they bring to it. So they give away direction, distance, speed, and mode. What we're going to do after coffee, we'll stop for coffee now. What we're going to do after coffee is now look at a strategy for actually now changing this and giving people movement, and also giving them meaning. And it's a strategy I have used really effectively for the most profoundly depressed people ever, without even going inside their depression, talking about how, why, what, all that kind of stuff. But it's a way of actually giving them a destination. Once we've done that, then we've got movement. We can start clearing up some of the issues in their lives, for which I'm going to show you some of those strategies. So let's go and grab tea and coffee, and we'll start back as soon as everyone's back.